And welcome back to the show. Do you know what warning signs are for strokes? Well, here to tell us that and more, we welcome cardiologist Dr. Ihab Alamari with Mission Hospital.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for having
Welcome
me.
to the show, Doctor.
Thank you.
It's a joy having you here. There's a common thing out there called stroke, and people know it after they see it, right?
Correct.
But we want to share with our viewers, what are the warning signs? What is atrial fibrillation, otherwise commonly known as AFib?
So atrial fibrillation basically is an abnormal heart rhythm where the upper chamber of the heart will be going into a very fast and irregular speed. So basically the upper chamber will be shaking or quivering, and that will lead to patients having symptoms like chest pain, shortness of breath, inability to exercise, fatigue, and sometimes even syncope or passing out.
So forgive my ignorance, when I drink too much coffee, I kind of feel that little jitter. How different is it when you're actually having AFib?
So this is totally different. Atrial fibrillation is, again, it's an irregular rhythm. So the heart actually, the upper chamber is going in an irregular, I will say, way.
And that's something that you can physically feel.
You can definitely feel, exactly. When you drink coffee, you're just having more sinus tachycardia. That's your normal heart rhythm going at just a faster speed, I will say.
Ah, interesting.
And that will be more of a regular rhythm.
Right. So is AFib dangerous?
So a lot of people, they live with atrial fibrillation. We have millions of people around the world, they have atrial fibrillation. The expectations in 2030 is to have about 12 million Americans with atrial fibrillation or even more. And this is a problem that if it's treated, patients live well with it. But the problem when it's not treated well, or when it's underdiagnosed or misdiagnosed, then it becomes dangerous. And the most dangerous aspect of atrial fibrillation is having a stroke.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So tell us what are those symptoms? What are we going to look for?
So for strokes, basically, patient could have either weakness or numbness in one of the limbs or the face, sometimes visual disturbances, inability to talk or speak, urinary incontinence, and other variety of symptoms. Those symptoms could be temporary, last about 24 hours. This is what we call a transient ischemic attack, or TIA. After 24 hours, they resolve. Or the permanent symptoms, and those are the ones that we call stroke, and those will last, for basically forever.
And at what point do you recommend people seeking help, medical?
Whenever a patient gets any symptoms of weakness, numbness, something new, he's unable to talk, there is something that is abnormal, immediately they should seek medical help, because stroke is very time sensitive. Mm-hmm. You actually can treat a stroke if you are within the window of treatment, but if you sit on it for a very long period of time, then the treatment options become not available.
So a lot of people think, it's abnormal, but it'll pass, and
Correct.
I'll be fine in a couple hours.
Exactly, and this is the mistake that a lot of people do, actually. So we always encourage patients that if you have any of the symptoms of stroke, and they should educate themselves and just read about symptoms of stroke, if they have any of them, then immediately they should seek medical attention, because that could save their life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so give us one more time a list of how do we prevent stroke in AFib?
So first of all, let's understand why stroke happens in atrial fibrillation. So this is basically the heart. We have two upper chambers and two lower chambers. This here is the appendix of the heart. This is basically the appendage, the left atrial appendage. It is a pouch, it comes from the left atrium, and usually when the heart contracts in a normal way, the blood goes in and out with no problem. But if the heart is in atrial fibrillation, the heart will be, again, quivering and shaking, and the blood will become sluggish. So the blood goes in, and it becomes stagnant, because this is a cul-de-sac. And that is a perfect environment for clot formation. So clot will form here, and then it will dislodge and go to the system, to our system, and to the brain, and forms a stroke. So how do we prevent that? The traditional method is basically giving patients blood thinners. Blood thinners, that medication that makes the blood really thin to prevent the clot formation in this chamber here.
Right.
The problem is a lot of patients, they cannot tolerate blood thinners. And that's why we do have an alternative for almost like the last 10 years by having what we call a left atrial appendage occlusion, which is basically a procedure to isolate the left atrial appendage from the rest of the heart. So the clot, when it forms, there is no way for it to escape into the system. It will just like be trapped here.
And I believe you sent us a video to show us exactly how that
correct.
works.
Yeah, we can show that video, and I'll show you. I'll tell you how the procedure is done.
Okay.
So this is basically it's a once in a lifetime procedure. So we go through the right femoral vein from the groin. We go up to the heart, and then we have to cross with that catheter. This is called a transseptal catheter. We cross to the left atrium, and then we exchange our catheters to another catheter that's called a pigtail catheter. This is a catheter that we will place in the left atrial appendage, which we see there. We have different shapes, obviously, of this left atrial appendage. And then we can inject contrast and visualize the appendage under fluoroscopy. During this procedure, this is the contrast going in just to look at the appendage anatomy. And then once we look at it, we size the appendage, and then we choose the right size of the device. Then we exchange for the device. This is the device that's called the Watchman device. Again, we have fluoroscopy and an echocardiogram at the same time to deploy it in the right position. Once we deploy in the right position, which we are doing like a fine adjustment, for example, here, to make sure that we're going to be sealing well, then we will look at the device and make sure that, number one, it is sealed. There is no leak around the device. Number two, it is stable. And we have enough compression on the device. We have to have a 10 to 30% compression on the device for the device to be stable. The device has small anchors that will go into the tissue of the appendage, and that will hold the device in place. Once we go through the criteria that this is the echo on the other side, on the left side, and you see how there is no leak around the device. Once we're happy with the results, then we have a knob that we can disconnect the catheter from the device, and the device will stay there basically forever. This device will take about 6 months to heal, and during these 6 months, we give patients aspirin and a super aspirin medication called Plavix. This will prevent any small clot formation on the device because the device is a foreign body up to this point. But after 6 months, it becomes covered with a normal heart tissue, and then you can remove these blood thinners, and then the patient will be only on aspirin.
And so during the first 6 months, can people exercise or resume normal activities?
Yes. So basically, this procedure is a one-day procedure. It actually takes about 45 minutes to an hour to be done. Patients usually go home the same day, and they are back to normal activity the next morning with minimal restriction. Like just for a week, we don't want them to do any heavy lifting or swimming or hiking, but back to normal activity, within a week.
Absolutely fascinating. So, doctor, who qualifies for this type of procedure?
So any patient with atrial fibrillation who actually qualifies for blood thinners but cannot tolerate blood thinners should qualify for this. Meaning, if the patient has atrial fibrillation, but they have a history of bleeding, let's say a GI bleeding or a brain bleed, you cannot give them blood thinner because that's dangerous. If the patient have imbalance, so they are at risk of falling or actually actively having recurrent falls, you don't want them to be on blood thinners because if they fall on the blood thinner, they will bleed massively. We also have patients with high-risk occupation, like pilots, firemen, sportsmen. You don't want these people obviously on blood thinners because of their job. You don't want them to bleed because patients with this blood thinner could actually bleed spontaneously sometimes.
Is that right?
Oh yes, and you don't want these people obviously to bleed. So There is a variety of patients that will qualify for this procedure, but if the patient has atrial fibrillation and they are on blood thinners and they don't know if they do qualify for this procedure or not, they should seek medical attention and talk to their physician and mainly to their cardiologist to see if they qualify for it.
My goodness, what a wealth of information in such a short period of time.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Iman Alamari from Mission Hospital, cardiologist, I appreciate your time and coming in with us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You're watching This Day on Village TV. We'll be up next with a library update.